LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the February 27th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing. Also, right below the video if you want to financially support my next 2 years doing these weekly live streams. There's links to my Patreon patrons and direct PayPal contributions if that's something you want to do to support what I'm doing. As usual, I'm taking the best clips. This week I have 11 clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. The topic of almost all the clips, I guess except for the so-called news summary from Fox News, which is about the field of Republican presidential candidates for 2024. But other than that, the topic of all the rest of the clips is how much support should U.S. give to Ukraine and what does victory look like on the 1 year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There was a lot of talk about both those topics, and I'll show you a bunch of newsmaker and news summary clips on that topic. And you can even see brief summaries of all 11 clips I'm using down in the video description, along with links to all the sources, including the entire Saturday Night Live weekend update that I'm taking the first minute from to use as my political comedy clip. I'm going to show you 5 jokes purportedly on the topic of Ukraine, although some of them really aren't on the topic of Ukraine. And then I'll explain afterwards some of my critiques of those 5 jokes. I'm not going to pre-critique this clip or pre-criticize this clip because I don't want to spoil the jokes, right? And anyway, like I said, you can watch the whole thing in a link I put under sources in the video description, and I will talk about those jokes a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
This week, President Biden made a historic visit to Ukraine and met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, where they greeted each other like two action figures having sex. Then, on the 1 year anniversary of the war in Ukraine, both Biden and Vladimir Putin gave speeches about the conflict. There was a language barrier, but the subtitles helped me figure out what Biden was saying. Many Republicans are criticizing President Biden's decision to go to the Ukraine instead of going to Ohio to deal with the toxic train derailment. But Biden said he was just waiting to shoot the train down until it was over the ocean.
President Biden is being praised for his surprise visit to Ukraine by taking a 10-hour train ride from Poland. You know who else takes a long-ass train ride through an active war zone? Every New Yorker. China is trying to help end the war in Ukraine and proposed a 12-part plan for peace. The catch is the 12 parts have to be assembled by children.
And like I said, you can see that entire weekend update from Saturday Night Live at a link under sources I put in the video description. I don't know. I mean, most of those jokes weren't really about Ukraine. Like the first joke about Zelensky and Biden hugging, and I actually used that picture for my thumbnail. But that was kind of at Biden, or I don't know, is that the expense of Biden and Zelensky, or of action figures, or was it vaguely homophobic? I don't know. That wasn't my favorite joke. And then the second joke about like Biden and Putin both giving their speeches, I thought, oh, maybe they'll make a joke at Putin's expense, but no, it was at Biden's expense again, and his stutter. And normally I'm a little wary of making fun of people's disabilities or whatever, but it's hard to say. There's the whole like when you make jokes you should be punching up, not punching down, but it's pretty hard to argue you're punching down when you're making fun of the president of the United States, so I can't really critique that much. And then the final joke was at Biden's expense, but I actually kind of thought that one was funny about like he didn't about the train disaster in Ohio. He was waiting to shoot down the train till it got over water, whatever, like a Chinese spy balloon joke. I like that was actually probably my favorite of the jokes. Then the fourth joke about like taking a train through the war zone, that was a joke at the expense of New York City, I guess. But also not really about Ukraine. And then finally at the end, that's what I'm always looking for. They like speaking truth to power, and big corporations in the United States rarely say bad things about China, and the whole thing about the Chinese peace plan has to be put in 12 pieces that have to be put together by children. That was like a sick burn on China. Nothing on Putin there, though, earlier, where I was a little disappointed. But anyway, that is my critique of the 5 jokes that makes this whole thing fair use commentary, so I can use copyrighted clips without infringing on copyright. So there we go. And, I was reading the live comments along the way, and I saw Tom Trask asking if I'm still in Northern California. Well, I mean, last week I did the show from the far reaches of Northern California, like very close to the Oregon border. And then right after I left, there was a snowstorm there. I left on Tuesday, and then there was a snowstorm on Wednesday that went all the way down to sea level in like the town where my daughter goes to college. And then I see Tom Trask talking about how overcast and rainy it is in the Bay Area. I actually spent this last weekend. Saturday, I went to Oakland for an ACLU of Northern California board meeting. That was kind of interesting. And then Saturday night, I stayed overnight in San Francisco and saw Sarah Silverman do a stand-up performance at the Masonic Theater in San Francisco. And that was fun. I mean, she seemed to be working out new material, but I enjoyed it, and it was a fun experience. I'm a big fan of Sarah Silverman's, and she's one of those people who kind of like pushes the boundaries of what is allowed in comedy, and the edge of cancel culture or whatever. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Sarah Silverman's, and I enjoyed that show. And anyway, so I wanted to respond to Tom Trask there in the comments, and then I'm now going to show you the news summaries from longest to shortest. Well, there are really 4 news summaries, and then there's the Fox News Republican propaganda show that's the second longest, so that'll come second. But first comes NBC News Meet the Press. It used to be that Chuck Todd had like the biggest, longest package, but he doesn't do that anymore. He used to like give a short intro and then have a long pre-recorded package. But I mean, it's probably not because show after show I would say that Chuck Todd had the biggest, longest package that they stopped doing that. Somehow I don't think that's why, but they've now done this thing where he does the intro and then he shows some clips, but he like narrates live between the clips, so there's no real pre-recorded package. And I will talk about that a little more after we watch the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, which is, on the topic of the same topic as all the other, all 4 of the actual news organizations, not the Fox News news summary, like I said. It's, the 1-year anniversary of the Russian invasion. No, this is closest to my defined topic about, what's the meaning of victory. Biden pledges long-term support. The thing about the F-16s, high Russian casualties, Chinese peace plan. This is probably the most extensive, best news summary, even though Chuck Todd doesn't have the biggest, longest package anymore. But I'll talk about that a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. As the war in Ukraine enters its 2nd year, the question is, what will victory look like? It's pretty clear no one involved, not the United States or our European allies, Ukraine or Russia, can afford for this war to be in the same place it is today, going into year 3, a year from now. And yet both sides, President Biden in a surprise visit to Kyiv and Vladimir Putin this week in Moscow, prepared the world for a drawn-out conflict.
1 year into this war, Putin no longer doubts the strength of our coalition, but he still doubts our conviction. He doubts our staying power. But there should be no doubt. Our support for Ukraine will not waver. NATO will not be divided, and we will not tire.
We decided to conduct a special military operation. Step by step, we will continue to resolve the objectives that are before us. They started the war, and we used the force in order to stop it.
Now, Biden's visit to Ukraine was the first time in modern history that a sitting U.S. president has visited an active war zone without a U.S. military presence. And Biden has hitched his legacy to the success of this war. Can he afford for it to drag on into the year 2024 and the inevitable presidential campaign? The American public is already divided on providing ongoing support to Ukraine, split 49-47 on whether Congress should provide more weapons and funding. Isolationism among Republicans is growing. with the leading presidential hopefuls out there right now trying to show some distance from the Ukraine war. On Friday, despite Ukraine's request and a growing bipartisan chorus in Congress, President Biden made it clear he is ruling out providing F-16s for now. Meanwhile, Russia has sustained nearly 200,000 casualties, 8 times higher than U.S. casualties in the 2 decades of war we waged in Afghanistan. Moscow's winter offensive has so far delivered just minor territorial gains. The only potential beneficiary of a protracted conflict may be China, which offered a peace plan, by the way, that Ukraine did not reject out of hand. The U.S. did, and it is still leveling accusations that China is considering providing lethal aid to Russia. U.S. officials tell NBC News that intelligence suggests that aid includes artillery and ammunition. But as U.S. officials sound the alarm, on Friday, President Biden downplayed the threat from China.
I don't anticipate, we haven't seen it yet, but I don't anticipate a major initiative on the part of China providing weaponry to Russia.
And joining me now is the President's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. Jake.
So sorry, I saw there were complaints about the audio. I don't know if it was the audio of the clip or is it the audio of my microphone, but I think I turned everything up, as I was saying, apparently too quietly before. Last week I was up in the far reaches of Northern California, and so I packed everything up and everything has been disconnected, and now it's been reconnected, and I don't know if I got the audio levels correctly. I don't know, I'm kind of reading through the live comments, so if you can let me know if my audio seems louder now, the clips are louder, everything should be louder, but okay. So yeah, sorry about that. And so that was the NBC News Meet the Press news summary that I very quietly introduced earlier, and I apologize for that again. And I think like I said, maybe I should repeat that it had all the important elements from the news week, the 1-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine with no clear victory definition, pretty much closest to the topic I set for my live stream. Biden pledges long-term U.S. support. So what does victory look like? How much support should the United States give? That was the title I chose here. They talked about the polling that shows that the U.S. Electorate is kind of split on the Ukraine issue, and that's historically, the longer the war goes on, the worse that's going to get. And that was something they discussed later on Meet the Press, how Biden can't let this go into 2024. I think Chuck Todd was kind of saying that at the end. High Russian casualties, the Chinese peace plan, the question of F-16s, and anyway, so that's the news summary from NBC News Meet the Press. The next news summary is, of course, from what have I done here? You can't even see. Maybe I should widen my thing a little here. What happened to the loudest voice in the room? Oh, there it is. See now, I have to reset my whole thing here. Hold on. There you go. Wait, now you can't see the OW in New Jim Crow. See, this is what I was talking about. This, whatever. Sorry you have to be here for this, but anyway, okay, so now you can see the new Jim Crow and the loudest voice in the room. Now it seems like a little too wide, but anyway, if you've read The Loudest Voice in the Room here from Gabriel Sherman, you know that Fox News was created to be a propaganda outlet of the Republican Party, and this week the opening news summary is so much one of these things is not like the others compared to the other 4 cable news outlets. And it's kind of ridiculous how it's first the main topic they're covering is the field. What did I say in my the the Republican presidential candidate field is taking shape. And then Senator Tim Scott's travels in Iowa. Now, I've talked about how all the news outlets have this bias towards their exclusive guest, that they'll skew the news towards their exclusive guest. And Fox News had Senator Tim Scott, who is shadow running for president, as their exclusive guest. So maybe that kind of explains the news summary being so different from all the other news summaries, but it was also like so soft on Senator Tim Scott. I mean, they even say he's like a champion of bipartisanship, and they don't talk about how like he killed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act on behalf of Republicans. That of course never comes up. There's like, is there even a harsh word about Tim Scott in this news summary? I don't think so. What's that word? I'm thinking, hagiography, like turning someone into kind of like a saint. Isn't that, this is like a hagiographic news summary that is not really news. It's more like Republican propaganda, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. We are still about a year out from seeing voters head to the polls in 2024 primaries, but the Republican field is taking shape with several candidates already declared. And there is a lengthy roster of potential candidates promising decisions in the coming months. Many of those high-profile names are making high-profile trips to those early primary and caucus states. In a moment, we will speak live with Republican Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, who is the subject of some recent speculation fresh out of Iowa. But first, a look at his recent travels to that all-important state.
As I hear more from the constituents here in Iowa and around the country, it will give me more information on what to do next.
Tim Scott's travels in Iowa have the feel of a campaign, minus the official announcement.
For America to be at our best, we have to work together.
His Faith in America tour is the latest moment in a fast rise from a single-parent home to congressman to senator.
I would like to introduce to you our Senate-elect Tim Scott.
Thank you.
As the Senate's only black Republican, Scott has worked for bipartisan consensus on tough issues.
I take the issue of policing in America seriously. I want our body to see it not as an issue of Republicans versus Democrats, but as good people standing in the gap, elected to do a job that we all ran to do.
Today, Scott is sharing his story of growing up poor, inspired by his mother.
My mom said we could be victims or victors. She chose victorious.
He's focused on the positive, but he's taking shots at President Biden.
I understand that President Biden lives in the past because he's been in Washington for 50 years.
He's drawn serious 2024 speculation, but is now on the spot to make the case for himself.
What are the differences in terms of policy positions that, for example, you may have with President Trump?
Probably not very many at all.
So joining us now to discuss his potential White House run, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. Senator, welcome.
And I don't have a clip from Senator Tim Scott because, believe it or not, even though he's like shadow running for president, Shannon Bream never asked him one question about what the United States should do in Ukraine. Most of the Republican presidential candidates have sort of a, like Biden's either didn't do enough to stop it from happening, or not doing enough now to end it, or I saw like with this one coverage of the possible presidential candidates, the only one really like saying that we have to stick with the Biden policy and like Ukraine all the way, or Mike Pence, I think, is the only one who's like not criticizing Biden Ukraine policy. But Senator Tim Scott wasn't even asked, and I think I pretty much pre-criticized that clip anyway, where I showed how Shannon Bream gave the softest introduction to Senator Tim Scott and his shadow presidential campaign. That, I mean, how could that have been put together any better if it were put together by Tim Scott? I mean, could you prove that wasn't put together by Senator Tim Scott's campaign people? I don't know. You can let me know what you think in the comment section. And now I'm going to get to three of the shorter news summaries, but the next two are about the same length, a little over a minute. ABC and CNN, both, covering the same topics. ABC is showing that bias I was talking about, that all the corporate news outlets have towards their exclusive guest. And of course, this week, ABC had President Joe Biden as their exclusive guest. So Martha Raddatz covers the news, but then it very quickly segues into the David Muir interview of President Biden. I just said President Biden, right? For some reason, did I say President Bush? No, I said President Biden. But anyway, here is the intro to that, and then I will show you the clip immediately after this where President Biden both talks about what victory looks like and, you know, whether we're going to give Ukraine F-16s. But this is the intro to that from Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos yesterday over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. President Volodymyr Zelensky declared the first day of the war in Ukraine the longest and hardest day in Ukraine's modern history. It's been an unbelievably trying year for his country ever since, but also one of resolve. Kyiv still stands, and Ukraine has taken back roughly half of the land it has lost since the start of the war. As we begin year 2, the U.S. announced new sanctions against Russia and another round of military aid to Ukraine after President Biden's historic trip to Kyiv and Poland, where he declared that Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. The leaders of G7 nations met with Zelensky Friday, forcefully calling for Russia to stop its ongoing aggression. And around the world, monuments were lit up in blue and yellow solidarity, from New York to Paris, Berlin to Sydney. But what comes next? This morning, we're going to assess the state of the conflict, where it's headed, growing concerns about China's role, and speak with Ukrainians on the ground about life under Russia's assault. But we begin with more of David Muir's exclusive interview with President Biden at the White House Friday, where they discussed the U.S. commitment to Ukraine heading into the next year of this conflict.
And like I said, I have a clip of that coming up right after the next two brief news summaries. Next one, CNN State of the Union, which may get like the award this week for covering the most topics in the least amount of time. This is only 1 minute, 11 seconds, but you see here that Dana Bash is going to cover the 1-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the latest news of, of the war in Ukraine from the last week, more U.S. aid, no known end to the conflict, F-16 fighters ruled out, possibility China could give Russia drones and ammunition. Remember last week I was talking about the possibility that China was going to give lethal aid to Russia to use in Ukraine, and that I saw one news story that said it was ammunition and drones, another one that said it was artillery and ammunition, so maybe it's artillery, ammunition, and drones, and I'll actually talk about that a little more after we watch the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, but here's the CNN State of the Union one from Dana Bash yesterday over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the state of our union is wondering how long this can go on. This week, Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine entered its second year. Ukrainian leaders say Russian forces marked the anniversary with a slew of rocket attacks, airstrikes, and shelling along the front lines as the deadly war grinds on. On Friday, President Biden announced another $10 billion of aid to Ukraine, which the country's fighters will use in a spring offensive. But 1 year into this conflict, it's still not clear how or when it will end, as both sides insist they will not give up Ukrainian territory. For now, President Biden is ruling out sending Ukraine F-16 fighters that President Zelensky and some top congressional Republicans say could bring a faster end to the war. And we're learning new details about that U.S. warning for China. Sources tell CNN that U.S. intelligence shows the Chinese government is considering giving Russia drones and ammunition, an escalation that could help Russia prolong the fighting. Joining me now is President Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. Thank you so much for joining.
And I actually have a couple Jake Sullivan clips coming up after the Joe Biden clip. But you saw that U.S. intelligence information that is on the topic I talked mostly about last week, about the possibility China would be giving lethal aid to Russia and how the Biden administration was calling them out and trying to ward them off doing that. Well, they still haven't really given out the basis for that, but they did have an exclusive guest for CBS News Face the Nation. I'm not taking a clip from him, because I really wanted to take a clip of the Condoleezza Rice interview. That's the final clip, clip 11, because then I get to tell my story about how I met Condoleezza Rice. So stay tuned for that for the last clip, clip 11. But I don't know if you know this, but the CIA director is excellent. He's Mr. Burns, and Mr. Burns is the guy who has all the intel as to how China is considering but hasn't decided to give lethal aid to Russia. The Chinese have considered but haven't decided about giving lethal aid to Russia. And there's a little bit of that in the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, which is the briefest, but then they segue into their interview with Mr. Burns that I will talk about possibly a little more after we watch the final news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. It was a high-stakes week on the foreign policy front. President Biden took a daring, top-secret trip to Kyiv to mark 1 year of the war in Ukraine. Chinese President Xi moved closer to Russian President Putin, while the U.S., NATO, and most of Western Europe doubled down in their support for Ukraine. On Friday, we traveled to CIA headquarters in nearby Langley, Virginia, where we sat down with CIA Director Bill Burns. Here's part of our conversation. On the cusp of Russia's invasion, you flew to Kyiv.
Oh, it's actually kind of an interesting interview if you want to see all the intel information from Mr. Burns, the CIA Director Burns. Margaret Brennan asked him about flying to Kyiv and telling Vladimir Zelensky that Russia was coming to kill him or whatever right before the invasion. But one of the cool things about Face the Nation is at the link under sources in the video description, that goes to the Face the Nation YouTube channel, where it's all available for free, pretty much the entire program, except that little snippet of the news summary. For some reason, that's not available. But like every other part of Face the Nation, except that little snippet I just showed you, is available on the Face the Nation YouTube channel. And so you can see Mr. Burns, the CIA director, talk about how they have intel about the Chinese considering sending lethal aid to Russia, but they haven't actually done it yet. And he talks about other things and his role there at the beginning of the war. But he's not one of my newsmaker clips. Like I said, I took the Condoleezza Rice clip, clip 11, so I could tell my Condoleezza Rice story. But the first clip I have to show, the most direct, like right from the horse's mouth clip as to U.S. policy, both on what is victory and whether we should be giving more, like F-16s, in aid to the Ukraine. This is David Muir's interview with President Joe Biden, or 2 minutes of it anyway, from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos on the two main topics of my live stream this week that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Mr. President, you know, as we sit here today, it was 1 year ago today, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You said in Warsaw that Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. So how does this war end, and what does victory look like?
Well, that depends on what the Ukrainians decide. But here's what we have to do in the meantime. We have to put the Ukrainians in a position where they can make advances this spring and summer and move to a place where they can negotiate from a position of strength.
You announced another $2.5 billion in aid to Ukraine today, $113 billion now. We know the vast majority of Americans support Ukraine, but there are now many who are asking, how long can we spend like this?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure how many are asking. I know the mega crowd is. The right-wing Republicans are, talking about we can't do this. We find ourselves in a situation where the cost of walking away could be considerably higher than the cost of helping Ukraine maintain its independence.
We know President Zelensky continues to say what he really needs are F-16s. Will you send F-16s?
Look, we're sending him what our seasoned military thinks he needs now. He needs tanks, he needs artillery, he needs air defense, including another HIMARS. There's things he needs now that we're sending him to put him in a position to be able to make gains this spring and this summer going into the fall.
You don't think he needs F-16s now?
No, he doesn't need F-16s now.
Is that a never?
Look, first of all, the idea that We know exactly what's going to be needed a year, 2, 3 from now, but there is no basis upon which there is a rationale, according to our military now, to provide F-16s.
But you're not ruling it out?
I am ruling it out for now.
For now.
So the one thing David Muir didn't follow up on, you saw Biden there say maybe this war is going to last like 2 or 3 more years. That is like huge news that wasn't really followed up on in that interview. Is it? And I think there was more breaking news on that today, that the Biden administration is like telling people to have not high expectations for a quick end to the war in Ukraine. And that actually comes up in this next clip. Dana Bash talking to Biden National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. This clip I juxtaposed with the next clip. Chuck Todd, I think, did sort of did a somewhat better job of cross-examining Jake Sullivan on this question of what does victory look like. And so Dana Bash asks the same question and gets the answer, it's up to Ukraine to decide what, you heard Biden say, it's up to Ukraine to decide what victory looks like in the war, the invasion. And then Dana Bash tries to ask it as like a hypothetical question. Well, what if Ukraine decides that includes taking back Crimea, or, are we going to support that? And then she asks how long the war is going to take. Chuck Todd goes one step further, and he anticipates Jake Sullivan is going to say the Biden administration line, well, it's up to Ukraine to decide what victory looks like. And you'll see in the second clip I'm going to show, Chuck Todd comes back, well, Ukraine says they want to take back Crimea. Are you going to support what Ukraine, you say you're going to support Ukraine's vision of victory. That's President Zelensky's vision of victory. Is that what you're going to support? But you'll see if you watch closely, despite Chuck Todd doing a little bit better job of cross-examination, Jake Sullivan's answer is almost exactly the same. And we'll start with the Dana Bash questioning. And I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
I want to ask about Crimea. Today marks exactly 9 years since Russia illegally annexed Crimea. The Biden administration still repeatedly says that Crimea is part of Ukraine. You also say that Ukraine gets to define what victory looks like. So I wanted you to sort of give a yes or no answer to this. If Ukraine decided that victory means recapturing Crimea militarily, would the United States support that?
Dana, I can't give a yes or no answer to what is a hypothetical question. Right now, what President Zelensky is focused on is getting into the best possible position on the battlefield so that he can be in the best possible position at the negotiating table. And he spoke as recently as this week about diplomacy. We want to help Ukraine turn battlefield gains into diplomatic leverage. And that requires us to give them the military assistance they need to make those gains. What ultimately happens with Crimea in the context of this war and a settlement of this war is something for the Ukrainians to determine with the support of the United States. But I'm just not going to get into hypothetical questions, because what we're facing today is a counteroffensive in the east and the south that we need to give them the tools to fight, and we are doing that.
You're talking about supporting Ukraine, and you're talking about them taking the lead on how they define victory, which is understandable. It's their war. But the administration is also promising them that America will support them as long as it takes. Can you level with the American people about what expectations should be? Could there still be a full-blown war going on a year from now on the second anniversary that the U.S. is still supporting at the levels it is now?
I can level with the American people in saying that war is unpredictable. 1 year ago, we were all bracing for the fall of Kyiv in a matter of days. 1 year later, Joe Biden was standing with President Zelensky in Kyiv declaring that Kyiv stands. So I cannot predict the future, and nor can anyone else. And anyone who is suggesting they can define for you how and when this war will end is not leveling with the American people or anyone else. What I can say is that the United States is going to continue to marshal this wide international coalition of countries to provide Ukraine with the tools that it needs to defend itself and to take back territory that the Russians have occupied. And we are prepared to do that. We have the staying power for that. We have proven we can sustain unity. We have proven that we can sustain this level of effort. And President Biden went to Kyiv to indicate that our support will be unwavering.
Before I let you go, I want to ask about a new Wall Street Journal report out this morning that a classified intelligence report from the Department of Energy concludes that the coronavirus pandemic most likely did not emerge naturally, but it did come from a laboratory leak. Did the coronavirus?
So I kept that playing because of that last story is overwhelmed Fox News today. Every hour on the hour, they're talking about the lab leak theory, which, there's only a couple pieces of evidence for the lab leak theory. A couple people got sick in November 2019 who worked at the lab. That's one of the big pieces of evidence. But I noticed Fox News conflates that a lot, the lab leak theory with gain of function research theory, because there's actually not a lot of evidence that it was engineered. Well, I don't know. But the thing is, as that's what science is. As you get more facts, you can change your opinion. You should always base your opinion on the best available facts. And as more facts come in, or the FBI and the Department of Energy, which runs the national labs and Lawrence Livermore Lab, they have a lot of experience on the running of labs. So they came up with their thing. They agree with the FBI about the lab leak theory, but there are other intelligence agencies that aren't so sure. And even the Energy Department has low confidence, which means the weight of the evidence is there, but there's no real conclusion, and I don't know if we will ever know. But you saw there, I don't know why I went off on that tangent, but I just wanted to mention that came up on a couple of the news programs, as well as the Ohio train derailment. I saw some seal beater asking about that. They did finally cover that on multiple news programs. I just happened to be concentrating on the main story, as I usually do, and that was the U.S. commitment to Ukraine and what victory looks like. And you saw the way Dana Bash asked the "What does victory look like?" question about, what if Ukraine wants to take Crimea back? Is that something? And then Jake Tapper was able to say, I'm not going to answer a hypothetical question, although Dana Bash also did a good job of leveling with the American people as to how long this war might go on. Sort of like I was saying with what David Muir didn't follow up on with years from now we might give them F-16s. What, you mean this war is going to be going on years from now? Come on, another forever war? That doesn't seem right. But Chuck Todd in this next clip, he does a better job of preventing National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan from using the "won't answer hypothetical questions" dodge, but he basically gets the same answer when he points out, well, Ukraine is saying right now they want to take back Crimea, and that's their definition of victory, return of all nationally or internationally recognized borders. I saw some discussion, including I think from Seal Beater in the live comments, that Ukraine wasn't Crimea was never part of Ukraine. Well, Crimea was part of Ukraine when Ukraine became independent after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and back in, I think it was it 1994, the UK, the US, and Russia all signed an agreement when Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine's borders at that time. So don't tell me Crimea isn't part of Ukraine when Russia itself, when Ukraine gave back the nuclear weapons to Russia that were based in Ukraine and gave up their ability to defend themselves as a nuclear power, that Crimea was part of Ukraine then, and everybody agreed to defend those borders or to respect those borders. So that's not ridiculous. It's a very difficult military objective, but it's not like in terms of being justified under international law, it's totally reasonable. And anyway, I will talk about that a little more after we watch Chuck Todd do his attempt at cross-examination of Jake Tapper on the same question over here.
Simple question, and I know it's got a complicated answer. What does victory look like for Ukraine?
That's up to Ukraine to define. It has been critical to us, and I said it just earlier in this interview, that there be nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And so it's not for the United States to define victory for Ukraine. It's for the United States to support Ukraine on the battlefield so that they can achieve the victory that they define. That's what we are determined to do. We believe they can achieve that, and we are going to give them the implements, the tools that they need to be able to achieve that.
Well, if that's the case, Ukrainian President Zelensky did define victory, what he thought victory looked like in August of last year. He said, Crimea is Ukrainian, and we will never give it up. This Russian war against Ukraine and against the entire free Europe began with Crimea and must end with Crimea with its liberation. There's always been a hesitance among U.S. officials, Jake, and I know you're included here, about Crimea specifically, and it's always been, well, it's up to Ukraine. Well, President Zelensky said it. Victory is all of the territory back. Why don't we say the same thing now?
Well, we have repeatedly talked about Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. The question for us is, how do we put Ukraine in the best position on the battlefield so that they are ultimately in the best position at the negotiating table? And President Zelensky, as recently as this week, has said we're going to have to ultimately get to a diplomatic phase of this conflict. So from our perspective, our goal is to strengthen the hand of the Ukrainians on the battlefield so that they are in the strongest position with the most leverage when they get to the negotiating table to ultimately achieve an outcome that restores Ukraine's full sovereignty and territorial integrity.
If they want to take Crimea militarily, will the United States help Ukraine do that?
Chuck, the critical thing right now is that they need to take back the territory in the south and the east that they are currently focused on, and we need to give them the tools to be able to do that. The question of Crimea and the question of what happens down the road is something that we will come to. Where we are right now is that we need to be focused on the immediate term because it is critical that we move fast and we move decisively to help them take back the territory across that line of contact that Russian troops are currently occupying.
It sounds like you think the ideal outcome is Ukraine is able to take more territory back. Putin fears that he could lose Crimea, and he comes to the negotiating table to see if he can keep Crimea. Is that the best case scenario you're envisioning?
Again, I understand why you're asking the question, but you have to understand that from the United States' perspective, we're not going to negotiate over the destiny and sovereignty of another country. That is for their democratically elected president to decide. What we are going to do is give Ukraine the tools that it needs, as I said before, to be in the strongest possible position, to ultimately be able to convert battlefield gains into diplomatic leverage. That is the goal here, and that requires us to achieve those battlefield gains through the provision of military assistance to Ukraine.
In the open of our show, people are seeing footage of a Chinese fighter jet warning an American fighter jet over the South China Sea earlier this week.
So yeah, you see there Chuck Todd asking about conflict between the U.S. and China in the air over the South China Sea, an important topic, and he did a pretty good job. I mean, it wasn't like listening and responding with to something unexpected that the newsmaker guest said. That, you know, the like height of cross-examination, you know, based on my experience as a criminal defense attorney, where you have to be able to like hear something and ask a good question about it, like in the moment. That's like Chuck Todd's weakness that everybody says, but he had good prepared cross-examination because he knew what Jake Sullivan was going to say about, like, well, we leave victory, you know, the definition of victory up to the Ukrainians. But then he said, well, Ukraine says, let's take back Crimea. Is that okay? But as I said before, I showed the last two clips. I think Jake Sullivan's still pretty much stuck to the same answer that he gave to Dana Bash. And oh, I saw Seal Beater was saying I created a straw man argument. He never said, or I don't know, is Seal Beater or he? I don't know. Is it a they, a she? I'm not sure. But Seal Beater claims I strawmanned Seal Beater by saying that Seal Beater had said that Crimea was never part of Ukraine, and I had actually conflated two different. Here's the live comments I was reading before. Seal Beater said, West wants Crimea so bad, but they will never get it. Well, that might, I mean, never get it. That might be true. I think before that last clip, I said that it was militarily a very difficult objective. I said that it was legally justified. And I'm not sure that I even said it was Seal Beater who made that argument, but I conflated Seal Beater's argument with this one down there from Zed Alpha. Crimea was never actually part of Ukraine. It was lumped in with Ukraine for administrative purposes. And, all that argument I made that I said might have been something Seal Beater said, it was actually Zed Alpha who I was arguing against by pointing out that I'm pretty sure 1994 agreement between Ukraine, UK, and Russia recognized the territorial integrity of Ukraine for, in exchange for giving up those nuclear weapons, and that included Crimea. So anyway, that is the conclusion of the first part of the newsmakers talking about whether the U.S. should what victory looks like, and if it includes Ukraine's claim on Crimea. And you saw Jake Sullivan basically give the same answer to two different cable news anchors there. These next two clips, one is Democratic Senator Ben Cardin, the other is neocon Bush administration apologist for the Iraq War, Condoleezza Rice. Both talking about how much support the U.S. should give Ukraine. And this kind of has to do with the F-16s. And there have been some critics who say that the U.S. should give the most, everything as fast as possible to get a decisive victory over Putin. And Russia, and drive Russia out of Crimea and give Ukraine a decisive advantage. And then there are some people who say that that is actually that could cause World War III, and if you push, give too much, that's at least the rationale that the Biden administration has given, that they don't want to cross red lines. And one thing I didn't mention last week, when Biden went to Ukraine in his secret trip, one thing that didn't get reported on a lot, I heard only in one report, is a few hours before he was there, when he was on the train from Poland, the United States informed Russia that Biden was going to be in Ukraine. And I've heard some people say that means that the air raid sirens were fake while Biden was there, because there were no attacks. And I don't know if there are any back channel agreements between the United States and Russia as to how much the U.S. will do to avoid fatal escalations, or who knows what's going on there. But that's one argument to stop World War III. That's why the Biden administration isn't giving everything, F-16s or whatever, as fast as possible, as much as Ukraine wants. But the other argument is that it could actually deplete military readiness of the United States and other NATO countries. And that's actually the cross-examination or the questioning that Shannon Bream does of Democratic Senator Ben Cardin in this next clip, talking about some information, including from the head of NATO, that we're running out of ammunition. We're running, and that's one of the things. Both the NATO and the West and Russia, everybody's running out of ammunition, and it's kind of a race to see who's gets depleted fastest. And I don't know, my money's on the United States and the West winning that war, but in terms of the waiting for years and keeping public support, so in some ways, I think if the United States is going to support Ukraine in its war on Russia, I almost agree with the idea that you should give them as much as possible, as fast as possible before like popular support and NATO resolve runs out. And so I almost agree with what you'll see Condoleezza Rice say in the clip after next, even though she is like a neocon, Bush administration, Iraq war supporter, and I disagree with all those things. Although I did meet her and she seemed kind of nice when I met her, and I'll tell that story. But after we watch the Ben Cardin clip responding to questions about the depletion of U.S. and NATO resources in questioning from Shannon Bream over here.
Okay, so let's go. I want to get to more of the foreign policy stuff because we're a year into this now, and we're now hearing increasing concerns about inventory, what we can provide and others around the world can provide in Ukraine. The Army Secretary said this week it could be 2024 or 2025 by the time the tanks that we've pledged can actually get there. The Center for Strategic and International Studies says 6 critical U.S. systems, these are missiles, ammunition, those kinds of things, artillery, are getting depleted. They say most inventories will take many years to replace, and inventory replenishment will become an increasingly pressing problem. And then the Secretary General of NATO said this on Thursday.
The challenge now is that the consumption of artillery shells is higher than our production. So far we have depleted our stocks, but this is not sustainable.
So how do we deal with the reality that the U.S. and other, Western, nations who are trying to help Ukraine here are running short on military supplies? We don't have a good plan for replenishing them, and how vulnerable that may leave us if we end up in another conflict somewhere else, God forbid, China and Taiwan.
Let me tell you, Russia is depleting its supplies. It's having a challenge supplying their troops with the necessary equipment to pursue this war of aggression. We clearly have been extremely helpful to Ukraine. They've acknowledged that. It's not just the United States. It's really been our coalition. Yes, we need to replenish the equipment and make more sophisticated equipment available. We need to bring this war to an end with Ukraine's victory, and that means supplying them with the equipment they need to successfully defend their sovereignty. It's going to be a challenge, make no mistake about it, but we've had coordination on the supply chains and we've been very effective in supplying it. There's a limit as to what the Ukrainians can use, but we have to make sure they have everything they need.
Well, what about our impact being able to replenish that inventory that we talked about? This report talks about how many years it would take us to catch up. If this conflict, unfortunately, nobody sees the end in sight or the finish line, where does that leave us vulnerable to other places in the world where we may get drawn into conflicts?
We have what we need to defend ourselves, and we're continuing to replenish what we need. We're not going to go below a critical level in order to defend our national security, but make no mistake about it, our national security is on the front line in Ukraine today. It's in the United States' interest to make sure that Ukraine wins this war. So our investments here are to help us defend our own country. There
are those, your colleagues are among them on the Hill, who are calling for more of an articulation from the White House about what our national security interests are there, where our commitments begin and end there. Mike Lee, Republican senator, tweeted this out this week. He says, after sending $113 billion to Ukraine in 2022, why should the U.S. even consider sending more money until every NATO member has begun spending at least 2% of its GDP on defense and has spent at least as much of its GDP on Ukraine aid as the U.S. did in 2022? Does he have a point?
Well, we do believe that every NATO country should spend at least 2% on defense, and we have a game plan to make that a reality, and we've seen tremendous progress on our NATO allies. What we need to do, of course, we have Sweden and Finland. We need to expand NATO to include those two countries. We're in the process of doing that. We want our European allies to do their fair share, and they are moving in the right direction. But make no mistake about it, Ukraine needs our help now. We have to supply the help now because it's a critical moment in the battle. We don't want this to be a long campaign. We want to win as quickly as possible. We want to help Ukraine achieve those objectives.
Andy McCarthy, our colleague here at Fox, wrote a piece this week, and he talked about how far we're willing to go. If you're estimating $100 to $200 billion a year, do we do that for 3 years, 5 years, 8 years? And he says if we're going to do that, we have to decide what we cut on this end domestically. As you know, we've already hit the debt ceiling. You guys are going to have some tough votes. Or does that mean that this bill just goes to our children and grandchildren? I mean, how do we balance those competing fiscal interests?
Shannon, it's a great question. We have to deal with the budget realities, and we have to come together, Democrats and Republicans. We have, as you know, the House is controlled by Republicans, the Senate's by Democrats. We've got to come together with a budget plan for our country. National security has to be a priority. the amount of resources we're putting into Ukraine will come back to benefit us in the long run. So we really need to make sure they have everything they need to win this campaign. That's the immediate issue, is to make sure Ukraine wins this war. But we also have to make sure that we stay strong on our national defense, and our domestic priorities are also funded, and do it in a responsible way that does not add to the deficit of this country, recognizing it's not fair for our children and grandchildren.
Yeah. We wish all of you on Capitol Hill good luck with figuring that out. Senator, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
So, yeah, actually, I don't think that was really bad cross-examination from Shannon Bream. You know, I've often said, I talk about how the loudest voice in the room says that Roger Ailes created Fox News to be a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party, and I have my Fox News biased playlist that shows hundreds of examples of Fox News bias, but that doesn't mean that journalism doesn't, incidentally occur as part of their mission, because I mean there are some journalists who work there, and they do journalistic things on occasion to keep the scam going or whatever. I don't know, but I can't really fault Shannon Bream for asking some tough questions about what the U.S. Commitment to Ukraine should be over many years. I was criticizing David Muir on ABC for not following up with Biden about what we're going to give the F-16s years from now. You mean this is going to be going on in your supposed second term or whatever? Anyway, not that I necessarily disagree with the U.S. war aims in Ukraine. I mean, I'm not a pacifist. I don't believe in military interventionism. I didn't really agree. I didn't agree with the Iraq War. The Afghanistan war was a little more murky for me because it was right after 9/11 and we were going after the perpetrators. I mean, I believe that nations and people should have the same rules on self-defense. What justifies the use of lethal force, in criminal law. As a former criminal defense attorney, well, you can use it to protect yourself from serious bodily injury or death, or to protect a third party from serious bodily injury or death. And that's kind of how I see what we're doing in Ukraine, is we're protecting our, not our, our ally, not our NATO ally, but our partner and ally Ukraine from serious bodily or injury or death from an invasion, an unjustified invasion by Ukraine. And I don't know, maybe if we'd done it back in 2014 during the Obama administration, when they took Crimea, we wouldn't even be in this mess. As I think people in the live comments were pointing out that Obama was too weak when they took Crimea, but I don't know. I'm not exactly sure if there was a way to prevent or to reverse that particular decision. And I think it took the invasion of Ukraine that the Biden administration handled pretty well by leaking all this intelligence about how it was about to happen, and Russia saying it's not going to happen. And then, of course, it did happen, and the surprise of Ukraine's defensive, their own self-defense and their ability to ward off the invasion. That's the big story of the last year. And Vladimir Zelensky, man of the year, right? But anyway, the final clip I'm going to show you is Condoleezza Rice, who, like I said, supported the Iraq War. That was not really a war of self-defense or defense of others. It was unless you believe the bogus intelligence about weapons of mass destruction that were never really justified. But before all that, way back in 1989, I think it was, when I was a junior in college at Yale University, I got to take some history seminars, and one was about grand strategy from Paul Kennedy, who wrote some great books about grand strategy and the rise and fall of the great powers. And I was a history major, and I specialized in like modern military, Western U.S. military history from like the around, around German unification to the present, or of course the present then was just like the fall of the Soviet Union. And at that time, or this was like right before the Soviet Union fell, one of the way this seminar was set up, Paul Kennedy did not lecture every week. Instead, I don't know, was he lazy or was he just like a great leader, and that he brought in different professors from around the country to talk about different topics every week. And then some of us would like volunteer to be the questioner or the main questioners of the professor every week. And I volunteered to be one of the main questioners of Condoleezza Rice. At that time, she was a Sovietologist at Stanford University, and she was coming to talk to us about U.S. grand strategy in the U.S.-Soviet conflict. And I asked her questions, it was mostly about like using air power to stop Soviet tanks from coming through the Volga Gap all the way across into Germany, and stuff that is like totally not of any importance now. But and then we like went out to this pizza place for lunch afterwards, and I got to have some, and like I said, she was a very nice person and very personable. And I mean, like most politicians, she, when she talked to you, she made you feel special. That's one of the superpowers that politicians have if they're going to be successful. But anyway, that's my Condoleezza Rice story, and now we can watch the final newsmaker clip. Condoleezza Rice saying, the thing we should do is we should do as much as possible, as fast as possible, to overwhelm Russia and get this over with, which, I mean, in terms of military strategy, that, I don't know, does that get us into World War III, or does that, like, finish up this problem faster? You can let me know what you think in the comment section as we watch the final newsmaker clip, Condoleezza Rice, together over here.
When you talk about delivering weapons to Ukraine, you wrote an op-ed with former Defense Secretary Bob Gates talking about this, saying have a dramatic increase in military supplies and capability. Does that mean train them yesterday on the F-16s they'll need tomorrow? Is that specifically the piece of weaponry you're focused on?
Well, we weren't talking about a specific set of weapon systems, but I think the idea that you anticipate and therefore perhaps you start the training before it's going to be necessary to send that equipment. The one thing we know is that this war keeps evolving, and you have to try to evolve a little bit ahead of it.
So you think President Biden's being a little too hesitant?
Well, I don't know internally. We have issues with stockpiles. We have issues with our own defense capabilities, because I don't think anybody expected to be fighting a land war in Europe.
Right.
And so I have some sympathy for that. But to the degree that that can be accelerated, I think it will help, because I think we have to get away from the phrase time is on the Ukrainian side. I would be careful about that. Vladimir Putin seems to believe that time is not on the Ukrainian side. He believes if he throws in the Russian way of war, mass at the problem, poor boys from Dagestan who are just kind of cannon fodder, if he engages in terrorist activities against the Ukrainian population, he'll wear the Ukrainians down, he'll wear us down, he'll wear the Europeans down. I don't think that's right, but we have to do everything that we can to convince him that it is indeed wrong.
And you can see Condoleezza Rice's entire interview at the link under sources in the video description for Face the Nation. Like I said, almost the whole program is split into clips for free on their YouTube channel. And I mean, Condoleezza Rice is like, I saw various people saying she's a war criminal, and I'm not disputing that. I mean, I thought a lot of war crimes were committed after September 11th, both in terms of the war in Iraq and of torture. And just because I said when I sat across from her she seemed personable and a nice person, that doesn't mean, that so was like Ted Bundy. Come on. I mean, I'm not saying that she wasn't. I think I specifically said she was like a neocon and an apologist for the Iraq War that I totally disagree with. So that was kind of the point I was trying to make, that she seemed like a nice person. But that's my Condoleezza Rice story from 1989, before any of that. That's my whole point of telling that story, is like the before and after kind of thing. But anyway, I also think that she has some experience with how the U.S. electorate loses support over time for military interventions overseas, having been part of the Bush administration during the war in Iraq that got less and less popular year after year. And so whether she's a war criminal or not, she's saying something that is true that people should think about in terms of U.S. commitment to Ukraine. And for that reason, if you think that the goal of reversing Russian aggression is a good goal, then possibly the correct way to do it, as part of my doctrine of self-defense and defense of third parties who are under threat of serious bodily injury or death. And I don't know, is like removal of someone's Crimea, is that serious bodily injury to the country of Ukraine? Maybe it is. Although I saw all the debate about whether Crimea should be part of Ukraine in the live comments. But my point being, if you agree with that goal of supporting Ukraine against the invasion by Russia, then is it better to do it as quickly as possible and get as much of it over with as possible before, the anti-war sentiment that seems to be mostly just in parts of the Republican Party right now is going to grow and grow over time, as the wisdom of Condoleezza Rice, the war criminal, teaches us, I guess. But anyway, you can let me know what you think about all of that in the comment section, and I've shown you all my clips. I've been traveling a lot. Like I said, the weekend I was in the northern reaches of California for last Monday and the weekend before that. And then this weekend that just passed, I was in Oakland and San Francisco. Next weekend, I have to do some more traveling down into Southern California. But I'll be back on Monday to do the show from here, and hopefully the volume and the framing and everything I'm not going to change any of that. But so I haven't done that thing where I take shorter clip from the live stream. I don't know. I might think about it, see if there's something I can take from this one. But probably not. But I might start reinstituting that practice after next week's show, when I won't be traveling for at least another month. And I hope you appreciate all the time and effort I put into watching the shows and picking out the clips and adding my commentary and criticism and responding to the live comments. And also for the recorded show viewers, I try to respond. I will have some time to try to respond to live comment or to comments from recorded show viewers. I think at least there are no, the audio and the video is all in sync. I apologize for the audio being too quiet at the beginning, but anyway, that's the show. I appreciate all of you who showed up for the live stream. I see there's also I do not have a son. I have a daughter, and if you go to the very beginning of the video, my daughter many years ago when she was very young said LiberalViewer presents, and I think I recorded that when she was like 6 years old, and but no, I have a daughter. I do not have a son, so I will clear up the live comment controversy on that. And having done that, I will finish the show and see you next Monday. And until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.